Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I am your host, Pierce Redmond, and you can find this show here at my website, which is porkinspolicyreview.com. If you are new to the show, there are lots of ways to listen. Of course, you can subscribe directly to the RSS feed here at the website. You can also follow me on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Google Play, Podbean, Player FM, practically all major and minor podcatchers out there. You can find my feed on all of them. So definitely, explore the various podcatchers out there. Let me know if there's an obscure one that you use, because I keep adding them to the website. Of course, you can also listen and subscribe to all of my shows on YouTube. Again, if that is your preferred method, then please definitely subscribe. Give me the, I hate saying this phrase, but, a thumbs up on YouTube videos is also very helpful. And hopefully, probably towards the, middle to the end of March, I will have figured out the sort of issues and bringing back the longer live show. It might technically be pre-recorded, but hopefully we'll be back to the regular 2-hour format in a few weeks. And it looks as if that will be on Chuck Ocelli's network, on Ocelli.com, is where you'll be able to find all of that, either in a pre-recorded way or hopefully live. But I've still got to kind of figure out the quirks to that. Very quickly, I also wanted to plug Patreon, of course, if you want to support my work. If you like what you hear on the show, then you can always go to patreon.com/Pierce Redmond. You can become a subscriber for as little as $1 a month. Very quickly, though, I just wanted to mention that I hope people listened to the recent Patreon subscriber podcast with Michael Swanson. Really interesting one where we talked about the late cult leader Lyndon LaRouche. And also I just wanted to plug my recent conversation with Ricardo Vaz of VenezuelaAnalysis.com. Definitely check out that episode if you have not. But without further ado, we have a very special episode for you today. This is the episode that I have been hinting at and teasing for the past couple of weeks. I'm just thrilled to have legendary radio host and anti-fascist researcher Dave Emory joining me on the show today. Of course, Dave's show, For the Record, can be found on numerous stations, across the country, including WFMU, which is very near to me, KPFK, a ton more. All of his shows, of course, are archived and can be found at spitfirelist.com. I don't think that, I don't think you need much introduction, Dave, to my listeners. But Dave Emory, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Well, it is my pleasure. Let me begin with a bit of an apology. I'm on the back end of a head cold, so I will be clearing my throat. I have a bit of post-nasal drip, so please bear with the limitations of the cells under the circumstances. I also, with that introduction, you were hinting and teasing at, I feel kind of like an anti-fascist Gypsy Rose Lee under the circumstances. But it is a pleasure to be here. And, wow, listening to, I'm old media. I am almost 70. And, I'm into the old, the three of us, reading, writing, and radio.
Yes.
And I'm very new to the new technology. And it has, in many ways, galloped over my horizon. And so, things, FMU is podcasting the show, but I'm mostly old media, and it makes me feel quite old. I would mention in that regard, there is a very important book. I'm going to be doing a series of shows about that, called Surveillance Valley by Yasha Levine, and it's called The Secret Military History of the Internet. I think many people know that the Internet began as a DARPA project, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency project. But it actually was even more insidious than that. It began from a series of overlapping DARPA projects that also included Agent Orange, the deadly carcinogenic and mutagenic herbicide used in Vietnam. And the focal point of the Internet is counterinsurgency, which sounds very dry, but the idea is they want to know who you are, what you're doing, what you know, whom you know, with whom you're doing it. And Yasha Levine then tracks the Internet on up through its contemporary applications and shows how the surveillance intent and crafting of the Internet originally is at one both with Google and Yahoo and Facebook and Amazon and all of these huge tech companies that are gobbling up people's information willy-nilly. Those companies, even though they officially decry NSA and the other intelligence services, have readily collaborated with them, and perhaps most importantly, Yasha Levine points out that the technologies that have been developed supposedly to evade surveillance and to permit people to evade, the NSA and other data harvesting programs, such as the Tor network, the Signal app for smartphones, were all developed by the very intelligence services they would have you believe they can circumvent, and they are absolutely accessible to the very intelligence services they would have you believe they circumvent. And all of the privacy advocates, Edward Snowden, WikiLeaks, Jacob Appelbaum, the late John Perry Barlow, who networked with CIA for years, was the lyricist for the Grateful Dead. They all had profound connections to CIA, primarily. And these technologies were developed by the Broadcasting Board of Governors and the Open Technology Fund, which are CIA derivatives. The point being that what those technologies and these privacy advocates, Eddie Snowden and all the rest, they're going to go, isn't this government surveillance terrible? How can they do this to our beloved sacred Internet? This is outrageous. And what they act, first of all, they're not acknowledging that the Internet was developed for that purpose. It's like the old Prisoner TV series. I don't know, I may be dating myself, but it starred the late Patrick McGowan, and it begins, it's about a spy who tries to resign from his service, and he is then drugged, kidnapped, and sent into this little controlled town called the Village, where everybody is either a prisoner or a jailer, and then they try to get information from him. And the idea behind these technologies, touted by Eddie Snowden and Jacob Appelbaum, is that basically they are what is known in intelligence parlance as honeypots. Basically, they are developed by and accessible to the very intelligence services, as I said, but they would have you believe they circumvent. They get you to go, hey, everybody, look at me, I have something to hide, be sure you follow me.
Right, exactly.
And that's what they do. That is what they do. So it is something I think that all of us need to be aware of. And I'll let you know, Pierce, when I get my shows up about that, and you can either include them, archive them on your show, or I also am transcribing sections of the book. But again, the book is called Surveillance Valley by Yasha, Y-A-S-H-A, Levine, L-E-V-I-M-E. It is as important a book as I think I have ever read, and that's over many decades of research. It's very short, too. It's only, the main body of text is only about 260 pages. It is consummately important. I think everyone should read it, in particular young people who have grown up with the internet, with mobile phones, with social networking, should read this and be aware of the very fundamental nature of what it is that they are engaged with. This is not to say that I think the internet isn't quite remarkable. I now reach a global audience, but it is not secret. And be aware that when you are online, and the various encryption technologies, they are all compromised. Be aware that you're in public. This is not to say that you should not use the internet, but don't ever get the idea, nobody can see what I'm doing. Your freedom, behold my wings. You're in public. So don't do anything stupid. Don't, in effect, shoot a moon, even when you're on your private email account.
Yes.
Because believe me, you are in public. And just understand that. Take advantage of what the internet can do. And it is an amazing technology. Particularly for an old geezer like me. You type in something in before, to a Google or whatever search engine you like, and it finishes your sentence for you. But it is quite remarkable. Use it for what it can do, and there is a lot that it can do, but be aware that there is a lot it can do that is very bad, and above all else, be aware that it is totally public. It is completely transparent. You cannot hide from the intelligence services or from the big tech companies, which are at one with the major intelligence services and all these privacy advocates. Eddie Snowden is a far right-winger who worked for the CIA. He has links to the neo-Confederate movement, to the white supremacist movement. So does Julian Assange. Glenn Greenwald is basically little more than a Nazi lawyer. These people have the most insidious connections. And, when you're on the internet, be aware that there has been a wildly successful seduction campaign in which well-intentioned, bright, young users of this new technology have been led down the primrose path by these spook seducers, to coin a term, and they're going, hey, isn't it terrible that the NSA, the quote disclosures, unquote, by Eddie Snowden, basically have been known for years. I've spoken about them in one form or another for the better part of 20 years. When Snowden first went public in 2013, I was thinking, well, why?
Why now?
Why is this news? Yeah, this has been known for years. There was a report commissioned by the European Parliament on the Echelon Network, also known as the Five Eyes spying network. That's the U.S., Britain, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And it said that they monitor every email, every fax, every telephone call, every cell phone call in the entire world. And there was an investigation by the European Parliament, and after a year they issued their report just about less than a week before the September 11th attacks. And it said, well, many European countries, meaning Germany and others, had the same capability. So it died a very quiet death, but this has been known for some time. Then I realized, wait a minute, when the New York Times is publishing this, and the Washington Post is publishing this, and NPR, and all sorts of allegedly progressive media voices that wouldn't touch things like the Kennedy assassination and many other aspects of intelligence abuses. Oh, this is an op, and I think it had much to do with elevating Donald Trump because it convinced young people that Barack Obama, who was caught between the devil and the deep blue sea, and Hillary Clinton, whose emails were bandied about courtesy of WikiLeaks starting in 2010. Basically, I think young people under 34, thought Snowden et al. Were heroes. And over 34, they thought they were traitors. But it had a lot to do, I think, with convincing young voters that Hillary Clinton was the man, so to speak. And I'm not a big fan of Hillary Clinton, but ye gods, Donald Trump, in his entire life, has never done anything honest or forthright in his entire life. And he went to sleep for years with a copy of Adolf Hitler's speeches called My New Order, a successor volume to Mein Kampf, in the drawer of his night table. That's what the last thing he would do. His idea of bedtime reading was to read some of Hitler's speeches. I mean, you guys, if you can't tell that Hillary Clinton is not the most wonderful person. She had a lot of good ideas, actually, that never got any press. But I think that, Snowden and WikiLeaks and all those people had a lot to do with convincing young people to stay home and not vote. And I think many of them were also seduced by Bernie Sanders, which may be a topic you want to talk about and the people around him. But, I was just amazed, Pierce, to hear about all of the various techno venues, to coin a term, that you were available through. And it just made me feel old on the one hand, and yet it reminded me that I think a younger audience should be aware of the book Surveillance Valley, be aware of what this technology is, where it comes from, and the fact that you have no privacy. You may think you're encrypting and doing this and that. Forget it. The people who developed it are the very people from whom you think you're hiding. So, use it, enjoy it, but do so intelligently and with a substantive degree of awareness, because you're in public. So, again, using a metaphor, don't shoot a political moon, even if you're on your private email, because it may become public.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, Dave. And it was just I will send you. I did an episode. This is probably years ago, about Tor and John Perry Barlow and Applebaum and a bunch of the other people at Tor. I'll send you that episode. I did it a while ago, but that's almost entirely based on Yasha Levine's articles, which eventually went towards writing Surveillance Valley. And I remember I just heard you recently mention this on your show, that you were going to do some a series on that. And I'm very excited about your series on Surveillance Valley, and we'll definitely link up to all of that.
Those the articles from Pando Daily that he did?
Yes.
Yeah, it really, I'm very glad to hear that you've already dove into those waters, because it really is an awful lot of people really have not figured this out. They think, oh my God, Edward Snowden is the second coming of Jesus Christ, and he's blowing the whistle on NSA, but he is CIA, and he's a foul little piece of work. Is your show broadcast on federally licensed broadcast entities, or only on the internet?
Just on the internet now, so feel free to curse if you'd like to.
Okay, well, that what I wanted to do was to quote Edward Snowden verbatim, and I won't have to bleep out words. He decided by his own account, this is a vile creature who, very close to Ron Paul, who's linked that they're joined at the hip with David Duke, with the neo-Confederate movement, who think the Confederacy was justified, that black slavery was justified, and that they should do it, meaning the Confederacy should do it again. In the summer of 2009, he was posted to Geneva, Switzerland, as an officer of the CIA. And we are to believe that, the angel of human mercy alighted on his shoulder and whispered in his ear, like Jiminy Cricket in the old Pinocchio Disney cartoon, oh, Edward, you need to do good. You could be so valuable to your fellow human beings. And he decided he had to blow the whistle about surveillance, and that launched him into his thing. But he is opposed to the New Deal and Social Security. He's a fascist, basically. Calls himself a right-wing libertarian. That is a euphemism. Fascism was coined by Mussolini, and he termed it fascismo, e corporatismo. Fascism is corporatism. He christened his system as the corporate state. So Snowden was engaging in a chat group about old people on Social Security. And he said, quote, "Want to save money? Cut this Social Security shit." And then he and some people began talking about how rotten old people were, they smell bad, etc. And Snowden, posting under the moniker The True Hoo-Ha, said, quote, "The elderly wouldn't be helpless if you'd stop sending them fucking checks so they can sit on their fucking ass and lay in hospitals all day." Wow. I mean, that is, and this is Mr. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Whom we are to believe is there is no sacrifice that he wouldn't make of his precious being in order to enlighten and christen humanity with the grace of his saving. I mean,
the holier than thou image of Edward Snowden, which he's still been able to maintain in spite of the fact that I don't believe he's been seen publicly in a while, maybe over a year. He doesn't make the type of pronouncements that he was making. He's not, video conferencing in, from Russia. It's funny that he is still been able to maintain this veneer of a sort of almost at times kind of progressive. He is this wonderful. He kind of reminds me of like the Peter Sellers Being There, where he can. You can project whatever you want. He could be the sort of, free speech libertarian. He can be the lefty progressive who wants to, protect our data. It's funny that his image is still not been tainted, in spite of the, like you said, I mean, these publicly available, quotes from him. The mere fact that his, personal history just sort of gets glossed over. His family's ties to intelligence, through his grandfather, whatever he was doing in Hawaii. When he was sort of working for the government, but was supposedly, planning his grand, fight against them. So very interesting. And to kind of link it all up again, I don't know if I was sort of unaware of this until recently, Dave, but I'm sure you've heard of, William Binney, Bill Binney, NSA whistleblower. He is it seems like an ardent supporter of, someone I mentioned at the beginning of the show, Lyndon LaRouche. Just to bring this whole, technology and the internet and NSA, back to this sort of right-wing connection, he appears near weekly on Lyndon LaRouche, LaRouche Pack podcasts, talking about many of the issues that we were just sort of discussing. But it's interesting, to see Bill Binney go from, again, this sort of, holier than thou hero to appearing on a right-wing cult leaders, weekly podcast. Strange bedfellows indeed.
Yeah, even beyond strange bedfellows, I think that what it is that they have a public relations Ku Klux Klan hood pulled over their heads, so you really can't see what they truly are. I mean, Eddie Snowden, his first lawyer was a guy named Bruce Fein, who also, that's F-E-I-N, who has links to LaRouche, by the way. He also was the chief legal counsel to Ron Paul's 2012 independent presidential campaign. Ron Paul's a Texas congressman. I guess he has retired now. His son Rand is in the Senate. But he has been networking with David Duke for decades. The chief blogger for his campaign, a guy named Jack Hunter, was a former chairman of the League of the South. That began as a neo-Confederate movement. I heard some of their radio broadcasts, and they were talking about how, well, slavery was the only way that black people could make the transition from slavery, from tribal to industrial society. And another guy was talking about, well, if the slaves hadn't been happy, all of those black mammies who were nursing those little white babies could have just smothered them in their titty, unquote. And the chief legal counsel for Snowden was, for Ron Paul's 2012 campaign, was Snowden's first lawyer. And when people visited WikiLeaks, they're on a different site now, I think. They were going to the Pirate Bay website, which is financed by a guy named Carl Lundstrom. He is also one of the he's a prominent European fascist and one of the chief financiers of the Sweden Democrats. That is one of these formerly more or less straight Nazi Nordic parties, but they've morphed into an anti-immigration populist party, like so many of them. And he, that is to say, Lundstrom, is very close to, what is that guy's name? From Red Ice, Daniel Freiberg from Red Ice Media, who's now networking with Richard Spencer. And they all network with David Duke, so that when people visited WikiLeaks, they were visiting WikiLeaks and using the Tor network, which is completely compromised. The intelligence services were monitoring them. There are numerous flaws in the Tor network that tech-savvy people, and the Pirate Bay people are very tech-savvy, can monitor. And Julian Assange's right-hand man, a guy named Joran Jermas, a.k.a., quote, Israel Shamir, unquote, a Russian-born Holocaust denier, arranged for WikiLeaks to be on the Pirate Bay website and is now in charge of WikiLeaks' Russian operations. So it is amazing to me to watch the so-called progressive sector just, oohing and eyeing over these people. And now there is much consternation about the rise of the alt-right. Well, how could Charlottesville have happened? How could all of these horrible people show up around Donald Trump? Well, it's because those people, the quote alt-right, unquote, are the very people whom the so-called progressive sector has been anointing as privacy advocates, champions of the little guy, and actually what under the theme underlying all of it is the same anti-government ideology that the far right has been marketing for a long time. Ronald Reagan, I'm going to try to do a Ronald Reagan impression. It will probably stink, but he said, government isn't the solution to your problems. Government is the problem. And that really is the ideology of the far right. And that is what underlies the likes of Snowden, WikiLeaks, Glenn Greenwald, and the rest. And I think that's why Bill Binney was appearing on Lyndon LaRouche's podcast. And again, Bruce Fein has links to the Schiller Institute in Germany, which is, a LaRouche font.
Oh, that's right. It's a front group.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's funny. I hadn't thought of Bruce Fein and his whiny, whinging little voice in so long. But just when you mentioned him there, I had forgotten about his connection with Snowden. And he also, Bruce Fein, Jack Hunter, and Glenn Greenwald were all on a speaking tour together. It was sponsored by a fairly well-known libertarian think tank, which is, the name is escaping me right now.
Is it the Cato?
No, it was a different one. It's something like Freedom. I forget what it is. I'll try and remember it. But it's just funny that they were all on a speaking tour together. It was always sort of shocking to see, seeing Glenn Greenwald, with Bruce Fein, and of course, Bruce Fein also has, he's denied the Armenian genocide because he's, very close with the Turkish government.
Right.
and is basically acts as a foreign agent. I believe he had to register. He was doing so much lobbying for Erdogan and others. So yeah, just a real shady character. And Jack Hunter during that time, was trying to rebrand himself from a, regular sort of right-wing conservative into this, I don't know, sort of, politically savvy, sort of, libertarian intelligentsia. But it's again just sort of a facade, and he's sort of, he's come out in favor of all sorts of horrible practices, and I think,
Well, he again was a chairman of the League of the South, which is way beyond conservative. Those, one of the things that Ron Paul. I'm jumping around here because I'm excited, and I do that sometimes. But one of Ron Paul's top aides is a guy named Walter Block. Again, a quote libertarian, unquote,
lunatic,
affiliated with the Ludwig von Mises Institute, and he has a concept he calls voluntary slavery, which I have joked on my program is not only the ultimate oxymoron, but the ultimate collateralized debt obligation. When you look at the likes of Snowden and Greenwald and the people around him, Jack Hunter, these not only they're not libertarians at all, these are people who literally, explicitly have in their background or in their foreground the ultimate curtailment of human liberty, which is slavery. And it is absolutely Orwellian. The chief bankroller of Ron Paul's super PAC, which, by the way, was in Provo, Utah, a Mormon epicenter, a long way from Texas, where Ron Paul is, but was Peter Thiel, the right-wing Silicon Valley maven, at one point the largest stockholder in Facebook, the driving force behind Palantir, the federally linked surveillance company that makes the prison software in all probability. And Peter Thiel explicitly, again, he bankrolled Ron Paul's super PAC, and Peter Thiel explicitly rejects democracy as, quote, inimical to wealth creation, unquote. He doesn't think women should be allowed to vote. If you parse his statements, he thinks one of the big downturns in the fortunes of democracy was when women were allowed to vote. Implicitly, he obviously doesn't feel that they should be allowed to vote. And one of the top legal/philosophical influences on Peter Thiel is a guy named Carl Schmitt, who was the ideological generator of what in Weimar Germany was called the Conservative Revolution, and then became one of the Third Reich's, arguably the Third Reich's leading legal theoretician. So when you hear the word libertarian, it is absolutely Orwellian because it serves, again, as like a Ku Klux Klan hood to mask the most repressive and repugnant and freedom-destroying ideologies and mechanisms imaginable. Again, they don't believe in liberty. They believe in the absolute antithesis of liberty, which is slavery. And if you do a little digging, that becomes quite explicit.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Walter Block, another character I hadn't thought about in many years.
There art thou happy.
Yes, no, I know. Indeed. And Block is, was the, I believe, he described himself like in the 60s, maybe, early 60s. He was a real commie until he met Ayn Rand. Of all people, so that should give you a sort of a glimpse into the sort of psychotic behavior of someone like Walter Block. And yeah, I again completely agree with you, Dave, on this sort of hidden message behind a lot. Because I almost at times I feel like the libertarian movement as it exists today is it is really basically just the things that they claim to espouse, they've sort of given up on that. And it really is just like a front for far right, almost like this feudalistic, slave master slave political ideology. It's quite scary how much that's all been blended together, and it's become so kind of mainstream that you even hear people like Donald. I mean, you look at Peter Thiel. Was not part of the Trump's administration, but he was on his business council. So you see these people are already being elevated.
He is a major advisor to Trump, and if you look at Trump's regulatory and administrative policies, they are, quote, libertarian, unquote. And I would submit that the concept of libertarianism, it sounds nice. I mean, who doesn't believe in liberty? It's a catch-all phrase. Yeah, I believe in liberty, yeah. But if you look at what it really means, again, Mussolini said, il fascismo e il corporatismo. Fascism is corporatism, and when implemented, libertarianism means no social security, no Medicare. If you're a big corporation and if you're producing a bunch of toxic waste, dump it into the reservoir, pour it out into the woods, and if it soaks into the ground and gets into the water table, and if some of those lowly working class people who work in your factories, if they and or their children come down with cancer or manifest birth defects, tough luck, not your fault. You're just being free, and that really goes to the core of why I think libertarianism is a brilliantly Orwellian term for fascism, because it is the ultimate rebranding and cloaking of the corporate state. Yeah, I have to be free,
Yes.
I have to be able to sell whatever product I want, no matter whether it's dangerous to the user or not. Here, buy my cell phone. Yeah, 20 years down the line, you're going to get brain cancer because of the electromagnetic radiation. But hey, I'm just being free. And you're not going to get Medicare or Medicaid because that is just too much big government. And so I have to be free of the taxes there, too. And don't expect me to give you a raise on your salary because, again, we don't want any of that government regulation. That would keep me from being free to do what I want to do. And if the smoke from my factory smokestack gets into the air and pollutes your water or your lungs, and if you get asthma or your children get asthma, or lung cancer, or tuberculosis, or emphysema, well, I'm just being free, I have to be free because I'm a libertarian. And again, don't expect me to pay taxes for your Medicare. I've got my health care. But, we can't have repressive government because we have to be free. I think Pierce, it is almost satanic in its parameters. It is so evil, and yet it is masked with one of the most wonderful facades, freedom, liberty. Oh, yes. How could I possibly not agree with that? And it is really wicked, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, and I've spoken about this before on the show. In my misspent youth after college, I was somewhat seduced by a lot of the libertarian talking points, and I thought it was there's such a wonderful, how could this be bad, and this all seems great. And then the more I really looked into it, you again begin to see the faults in this and how really you're not gonna make it in that world. Now Peter Thiel will make it. Ron Paul might make it, but me, Pierce Redmond in New York, I'm probably not going to make it. And then beyond that, too, very much what you're saying, I mean, there's this sort of satanic aspect to it, or this sort of almost religious fervor and this cult-like devotion to some of these figures that really do kind of take on these godlike, Murray Rothbard and others, the way that people kind of worship them, really kind of freaked me out. And began to kind of, finally see the forest for the trees, and completely rejected it. But yeah, I 100% agree with you. And as someone that was sort of on the peripheral of that and sort of, involved in it, and then finally, leaving and looking at it to see where it's gone is quite disturbing. And maybe we can even kind of like link up that to another topic that I wanted to discuss with you, Dave, because it's something that you've covered many times on your show, and that is the sort of Hindu fascism and also Tulsi Gabbard's connections to that. And I'll link those just by saying that a lot of libertarians and a lot of these right wing figures like Bannon and others seem to love Tulsi Gabbard, and they seem to have this affinity for her. You see that more and more, amongst a lot of these alt-right figures that are praising her probable, 2020 run. Well, I guess she is running. I don't know how likely it is.
Yeah,
she's going to go.
Has announced.
Yeah. You see them kind of praising her along with, all of these, I mean, I hate to say it, but just either naive or just plain stupid lefties. Various leftist writers and activists and a lot of anti-war people that think that she's the second coming of Christ or Krishna or whatever you want to say. I think again too, Tulsi Gabbard is such a wonderful vehicle to push a lot of these ideas. She doesn't want to go to war and all these things, and once you kind of really listen to what she's saying, you start to see that none of that is really true. She's fine with going to war as long as it's about, exterminating the Muslims, or the terrorists, as she would put it. But I think there's a lot more to when she's talking about going after terrorism. And I mean, David, someone you've kind of looked into this quite a bit, and I'm still amazed that Tulsi Gabbard keeps getting a pass from people on the so-called left when it comes to her actual beliefs on foreign policy, and certainly, I mean, she gets a pass when you try to bring up her relationship to a destructive cult in Hawaii that is led by a man called Chris Butler. So I'll throw it to you, Dave, to just kind of pick it up from there.
Well, let me start with a discussion of some of the history of third world fascism. When fascism first coalesced in the 20s and 30s, and then it went to war in the late 30s and 40s, the colonial age was still very much in effect, albeit in its dying stages. The European powers, most of them had colonies, and those colonies were yearning to be free, and there were populist movements in those countries seeking to win their independence from their colonial masters, Britain, France, the Netherlands, Belgium, and other countries, and there also was the Soviet Union, which had a lot of Muslim nationalities, ethnic groups within its borders, particularly in the South. One of the dynamics that manifested in the 20s and 30s was that some of these third world nationalists and anti-colonialists, so what we would today call third world nationalists and anti-colonialists, sought to ally themselves with the formidable military and victoriously formidable military forces of Nazi Germany or Imperial Japan. One of the most important of those was the Muslim Brotherhood. This is an Islamic fascist movement that began in the late 20s, founded by a guy named Hassan al-Banna. Al-Qaeda, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Islamic State, are all offshoots of the Muslim Brotherhood. It was explicitly fascist. It was allied primarily with Nazi Germany, although some elements of it also supported Imperial Japan and to use as a military ally against the British primarily, and also the Dutch in Indonesia. That has borne fruit. They were allied with the Axis, and then at the end of World War II, they jumped to Western intelligence, primarily the CIA, but also British MI6, to be used as anti-communist cadre. The Afghan Mujahideen were basically an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. They, of course, morphed into Al-Qaeda. The Muslim Brotherhood has corporatist economics as its foundation. The World Bank views Ibn Khaldun, that's IBN, last name Khaldun, as he is the primary economic theoretician revered by the Muslim Brotherhood. And the World Bank views Ibn Khaldun as the foremost and earliest advocate of privatization. When Ronald Reagan was touting his supply-side economics from the University of Chicago and Milton Friedman, he cited Ibn Khaldun as an early exponent of his economic philosophy, not only because of their use as anti-communist cadre during the Cold War in the Muslim and third worlds, but also because of their corporatist privatization ideology epitomized by Ibn Khaldun. The Muslim Brotherhood is very powerful today. They have tremendous influence in the U.S. Islamic community. The Council on American Islamic Relations, which has developed a reputation as being sort of like the Muslim NCAA, or the Muslim National Advancement for the Advancement of Colored People. Excuse me, NAACP. That's what I meant to say, not NCAA. No, that is a different organization. They have a different attitude toward liberating black folks, but we'll leave that for another time. Yes, fuse a synapse there, but actually, in the Holy Land Foundation trial in Texas, documents were revealed that, in fact, CAIR is a front organization for the Muslim Brotherhood. This point being that these third world fascist movements are not only alive today, but they're very powerful. The first leader of the Palestinian national movement, as it has come to be known, was a guy named Haj Amin al-Husseini, the so-called Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. He was very close to the Muslim Brotherhood and formed many military formations out of Muslims on behalf of the Third Reich, and to a lesser extent, Imperial Japan as well. In the Balkans alone, the Grand Mufti midwived the creation of 3 Muslim Waffen-SS divisions. He himself held the rank of Major General in the Waffen-SS, the 13th or Hanjar Division, for which, by the way, Ali Izetbegovic, the first head of state of the, quote, independent, unquote, Bosnia, was a prominent man. The 21st or Skanderbeg Division and the 23rd or Kama Fascist organization called the RSS, Muslim Waffen-SS division in the Balkans, Hindi pronunciation of that. This is headed up by a guy named tremendously in the Savarkar, S-A-V-A-R-K-A-R. And this organization was explicitly Hindu nationalist. They thought that the Hindus were superior, that they were superior to the Muslims, who were their arch ideological enemies and scapegoats. And ultimately, Savarkar and the guy named Golwakar formed the RSS and specifically modeled it after Mussolini's black shirts in Italy. They also had profound links to the Nazis and to the SS. They saw Hitler's movement in Germany as analogous to theirs, and they felt that Hitler's treatment of the Jews was a model for what they wanted to do to the Muslims in India. There also was a strong degree of affinity between the occult philosophy of the SS, which saw the SS as the manifestation of the Aryan race, which the Hindutva fascists of the RSS also believed as well. Both the Nazis and the SS and the Hindutva, Hindutva fascists of the RSS believed themselves to be manifestations of the superior Aryan people. And the Nazis saw the Jews as their enemies, and the RSS saw the Hindus as the Muslims rather as their enemies. They all hated the Jews, of course, as well. And the RSS also ultimately felt that a purged Britain, which if it could become a pure Aryan power, were natural allies of the RSS. There also was a very closely allied organization called the Hindu Mahasabha. In fact, I'm probably butchering many of these Indian pronunciations. It might have been more like Mahasabha. But this was an explicit Hindu military organization, very close to the RSS, which advocated that Hindu nationalists, or Hindutva, Hindu first, nationalists and fascists, enlist in the British colonial military, the British military for World War II, in order to gain military training and prowess. The main enemy of the RSS and D.D. Savarkar was Mahatma Gandhi, who not only preached nonviolence, he preached reconciliation and mutuality between Indian Hindus and Indian Muslims. This did not sit well with the RSS. It didn't sit well with the British either, who, much as they did in Palestine, sought to divide and conquer between the Muslims and the Jews in Palestine, and between the Hindus and the Muslims in India. Ultimately, the RSS was the main vehicle, and the Hindu Mahasabha, both of which were very, very strong in the fledgling Indian security apparatus, both in the Indian military when it gained independence, in the Indian intelligence services, and in their police cadre as well. One could not exaggerate the importance of the RSS and the Hindu Mahasabha in the Indian police and national security establishments. That is what permitted them to assassinate Mahatma Gandhi. The RSS killed Mahatma Gandhi in an elaborate conspiracy that is very well documented if one wants to take the time to do that. I did 2 programs about that a little over a year ago, and the audio tracks and the written documentation are available. You can certainly link to those. By the way, Pierce, anything and everything that I've done over about 40 years on the air, feel free to link to and or archive.
Please, yeah, I will.
To do that. Anyway, so the RSS, again, an explicit Hindutva, Hindu first, Hindut, as in Thomas, V.A., Hindu first, Hindu nationalist, fascist organization, modeled after Mussolini's black shirts, very closely affiliated with the Third Reich, both operationally and ideologically. They sought a Muslim Rhine, so to speak, Muslim-free India. They were anti-Muslim, and just as the Muslim Brotherhood would point to whatever group they sought to demonize, be it Jews, Christians, or in India and Pakistan, Hindus, so too the RSS would point to the mullahs. One of the things about fascist movements, they are corporatist, they are pro-big business, but they divert people's attention to those people, the Jews, those infidels, the Christians, the Jews, the Crusaders, to the Muslims and the Muslim Brotherhood, or to the Hindutva fascists of the RSS. Those Muslims, aren't they terrible? Now, ultimately, after they killed Gandhi, the RSS was very powerful. They formed a number of political fronts, the most important of which is the BJP party. That's Boy, John, Peter. I'm not going to attempt the Indian pronunciation. I'll make a fool out of myself. That organization has gained in power and influence over the years, and a few years ago, in part because of financing from Pierre Omidyar of eBay, who has operational links with CI fronts like the National Endowment for Democracy and the Agency for International Development, both of which they're more than just CIA, but they are largely CIA, are clandestine operational fronts. Omidyar helped to bankroll the successful election of Narendra Modi. Modi is the head of state and the banner carrier, so to speak, for the BJP, which is a political front for the RSS. When Narendra Modi made his political appointments, they were almost entirely from the ranks of the RSS, from this Hindutva fascist political party modeled after Mussolini and affiliated with the Nazis. This is the political party that killed Mahatma Gandhi. Journalists and activists who dissented from the Hindutva agenda were murdered, and their murders have not been solved. There were, in effect, pogroms against not only Muslims, but Dalits, the untouchables, poor people who ate meat, because the eating of beef is considered sacrilegious to the Hindutvas because the cow is a sacred animal. And so whether or not they'd actually eaten beef or were just rumored to have eaten beef, there were horrible killings and beatings by what became known as the cow vigilantes. In other words, the word would get out that so-and-so or this group of people had been eating beef, and they were harassed and often killed or terribly beaten. And Modi, by the way, has implemented a surveillance program, a far-reaching surveillance program covering everything. And whereas India had been, in many ways, a model democracy, now it is a very tightly controlled country under Narendra Modi. Now, Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard is a congresswoman from Hawaii. She also served in the Hawaii National Guard, got some service in Iraq. She has, to an extent, been misrepresented as a veteran. She is technically a veteran, but she did not carry a gun. She commanded basically a hospital unit, a National Guard hospital unit that served in Iraq. Some of my Vietnam veteran associates would have referred to her as a REMF, that's R-E-M-F. And since we're not on radio, I can relate what that means. It means rear echelon motherfucker, although maybe fatherfucker in her case. But it is not a term of endearment. It means basically they were in the back where there was no shooting. But she parlayed that in the very successful way into her political persona. What has not been covered as much is her background. She and her family, her parents, her husband, her congressional staff are all members of something called the Science of Identity Foundation. Hello?
Yes, I'm still here, Dad.
Oh, okay, I heard a click. I thought maybe the phone.
Oh, no, continue on. I'm just listening intently.
Yeah, the Science of Identity Foundation, which is an offshoot of the Hare Krishna cult. Now, the Hare Krishna cult got a lot of press during the hippie era. They did a gig at the Fillmore, in which, or maybe it was Winterland, I'm not sure which, but all the top psychedelic era bands, Jefferson Airplane, Quicksilver Messenger Service, The Grateful Dead, all did benefits for, and I call him Prabhupada, but he has about 4 names, the guru of the Hare Krishna cult. And everybody thought this was just wonderful. Well, it turns out that the Hare Krishna cult is basically a Hindutva fascist mind control cult. Prabhupada is quite explicit about feeling that absolute monarchy or ideally dictatorship is the ideal form of government. He thought Hitler was great. He thought Hitler's treatment of the Jews was great. He is deeply racist and feels, as quite a few light-skinned Indians do, that people of dark skin are inferior. India has many different ethnic groups, some of whom have quite light skin, some of whom quite dark, and there is a fair amount of prejudice in India toward those with dark skin. Prabhupada, the guru of the Hare Krishna cult, felt that black people of color, were inferior. He felt that the Native Americans were inferior. He felt that black people in this country deserved slavery. He was explicitly racist. He also, again, was overtly pro-dictatorship. He thought that was the ideal form of government. He was basically a dyed-in-the-wool misogynist. Mm-hmm. He felt that women were inferior, that they were too lusty, and that women loved men who were expert at rape, and that when a man raped a woman secretly loved it. I mean, this will sound repulsive to many people, but this is what he believed. And Tulsi Gabbard, again, from an offshoot, a branch of the Hare Krishna cult, did this grotesque encomium, really, to Bishop Prabhupada. I have the audio track. There's a video available online, where she talks about how wonderful he was and how humbled and grateful she is to be able to honor him. And this guy is a monster. I mean, an absolute.
And we should note too that Prabhupada is on record stating these things. This isn't like rumors and innuendo. I mean, he openly openly talked about his hatred of I forget the Indian term. It's like shukra or something. I might be mispronouncing that, but that's for dark-skinned Indians about their
Sudras,
yes.
Sudras, yeah, and they're just really again, this is not inference or innuendo. No, he came right out and spelled it out in no uncertain terms. I mean, he is a racist and an anti-Semite and a fascist and an admirer of Hitler and an anti-Semite and a misogynist, and is quite explicit about all of those things. And Tulsi Gabbard is basically adulates the Prabhupada. And beyond that, Tulsi Gabbard is an admirer of Narendra Modi, of the BJP and the RSS. In fact, she helped to arrange many of the details from Narendra Modi's 2015 trip to the U.S. She traveled to India. She was networking directly with the RSS, the Hindutva fascist organization, modeled after Mussolini, ideologically affiliated with the Nazi SS, the organization that killed Gandhi, and the organization that is the real power behind the throne, so to speak, the political facade of the BJP and Narendra Modi. Now, she has, as you said, garnered a lot of publicity in the so-called progressive sector because she is against wars of intervention. She denounced the war in Iraq. And, for what it's worth, I agree as far as that goes. But what she doesn't agree with is sending troops over to the Middle East to fight. She's fine with unrestrained drone warfare, with unrestrained counter-terror activities against Muslims abroad or in this country, in keeping with the anti-Muslim philosophy of the RSS and the BJP. She is beloved of Steve Bannon. As you know, Bannon even interviewed her as a prospective Trump appointee. There is quite a bit of pro-Trump sentiment among Indian Americans. I don't mean Native Americans, but the Indians, people from South Asia, Indians in particular, are the second fastest growing demographic in the United States today. And there is quite a bit of pro-Trump sentiment in their ranks. Many of Trump's business contacts in India are people affiliated with the BJP, again, the political front for the Hindutva fascist RSS. Tulsi Gabbard placed Bernie Sanders' name into nomination at the Republican convention. She was being bandied about as Bernie Sanders' prospective vice presidential candidate if he had gotten the nomination. She also, by the way, is on the record as being ardently homophobic, although she underwent what I believe is a superficial Damascus Road conversion. Now, she favors gay marriage and all kinds of things, but she was ardently anti-gay in her early political pronouncements. And again, herself, her husband, her parents, and her congressional staff are all from this Hare Krishna cult. She was the deputy chairperson of the Democratic National Committee, resigned in 2016 to campaign for Bernie Sanders. I wonder if she was the Democratic Party insider who downloaded Hillary Clinton's emails and the emails from the DNC, basically, that were then put up on WikiLeaks, apparently courtesy of Roger Stone. They were given to WikiLeaks and a guy named Craig Murray, a former UK ambassador to Uzbekistan, who claimed he was given a flash drive, but this wasn't a hack. He was given a flash drive by a Democratic Party insider. I wonder if that was Tulsi Gabbard, as it remains a conjectural thing. The point being that, yes, she is against wars of intervention. She's fine with killing Muslims. She doesn't she simply does not think that U.S. troops should be deployed into wars of intervention or regime change. And in our superficial culture, that won her a following in the so-called progressive sector. I also suspect that she has been represented as the first Hindu in Congress. So she's actually Hare Krishna, and real devout Hindus look down on the Hare Krishnas, and vice versa. They look down on real Hindus. They don't like each other. And I think a combination of Orientalism and go, oh, isn't that wonderful? She's a Hindu member of Congress. Plus, she's a good-looking woman. And this is a superficial, television, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook culture. And she's cute, so people go, well, gosh, wow, she's sure as pretty, but she is. And she, is against wars of regime change, and, she's the first Hindu member of Congress, and she likes Bernie Sanders. Oh, Tulsi, I love you. I'm going to vote for you. And they don't really do much homework. And she actually is beloved of Steve Bannon. She is affiliated with Hindutva fascism and the political party that murdered Mahatma Gandhi. That's really bad. Really, really bad. And I've forgotten his name offhand, but Gandhi worked with a Muslim leader to try to manifest mutuality between the Muslim and Hindu populations of India, unsuccessfully. And this fellow, whose name I forget, he became for a time Prime Minister of Pakistan, and then ultimately was murdered. So he got killed too by the Muslim fascists. But the point being with Tulsi Gabbard is that she is the antithesis of what one might expect from a, quote, progressive unquote. Another interesting link to Indian fascism going back to the colonial period is now cropping up in connection with AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the wunderkind of the left wing of the Democratic Party, the self-proclaimed Democratic Socialist. I think his name is Chakrabarti or Chakrabarti. I'm just becoming familiar with him. Begins with a C. He is of Indian extraction, born in Fort Worth, Texas, educated at Harvard University, so obviously he's no dummy. He became a millionaire working in Silicon Valley and on Wall Street, and then he became suddenly, taken with the cause and hooked up with the left wing of the Democratic Party and AOC. He recently had a Twitter video, I think it was, in which he was defending AOC's attempts at defending her political stances on social media. What was so interesting is that as this guy, I think his name was Chakrabarti or Chakrabarti, let me bring up the internet here. I've got a
It's Saikat Chakrabarti.
Chakrabarti, thank you.
Yes.
Anyway, so he and this is her chief of staff who had much to do with getting her elected. He is doing this very eloquent, articulate. He's a good-looking guy, well-spoken, and he's doing this defense of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her social media activism. And he is wearing a T-shirt, looks to be like an olive green military-colored T-shirt, and there is a guy with a fatigue cap on. It is not a picture that would be familiar to the overwhelming majority of Americans or most people in the world. The picture is of a guy named Subhas Chandra Bose, last name B-O-S-E. Subhas Chandra Bose was one of these anti-colonial leaders in the 20s and 30s who turned to an affiliation with fascism as a vehicle for effecting the ousting of the British as the colonial masters of India. He was associated with the Imperial Japanese. His Indian National League unit had several different names. Ultimately, fought alongside of the Axis in World War II. He met personally with Adolf Hitler. He networked with Heinrich Himmler, the Reichsführer SS, and ultimately his forces were incorporated into the Waffen SS, which also, with which also Hashemi al-Husseini, the Muslim fascist, worked extensively. And the point being that if this guy is so progressive and wonderful and just wants, economic democracy and the freeing of everything, what in bloody hell is he doing with a picture of an SS-allied Indian fascist combatant from World War II on his T-shirt? I mean, you would think that if he actually held views like that, he might have a picture of Gandhi.
Sure.
No, he has a picture of Subhas Chandra Bose. The right-wing media are beginning to circulate this. My guess is them being basically a lot smarter than the so-called progressive forces, in my opinion. They're going to hold back on this one, and they're going to let AOC puff herself up. And boy, is that going to make a beautiful vehicle for torpedoing her and all of the elements around her. I mean, I don't think much of AOC at all. She is extremely immature. You would find quite a bit of affinity for things that I would like, ideally, and what she would like. I mean, sure, it'd be great if we could have, free healthcare and free education for everybody and the guaranteed job. I think it would be great, Pierce, if I was going to live forever. I think the chances of all of those happening are about the same. Benjamin Disraeli noted that Queen Victoria's prime minister, that politics is the art of the possible. In yesterday's New York Times, there was an op-ed, a very well thought out and well-written op-ed piece by David Brooks, one of their conservative columnists, whom I don't think too much of most of the time. But he made a very cogent, well-reasoned argument about why Medicare for all just ain't going to happen, including the fact that in many places healthcare is one of the leading employers of people. In San Francisco, for example, in the Bay Area, it has a booming tech community, very much like New York, but the largest single employer in the city of San Francisco is its very significant healthcare infrastructure and many research hospitals and others. And the point being that if, like Bernie Sanders and the Medicare for all people, the purists, simply want to eliminate private insurers, that is going to cause huge economic problems in and of itself. And roughly half of the American people have health insurance through their employers. And getting them to give up that health insurance in favor of a hypothetically excellent government-run program, which is going to cost a lot of money, I think is ultimately a losing bet, considering, in particular, aside from the fact that the actualization of that will be very difficult, it is going to have to be implemented, if it was implemented, in the face of the profoundly strong, scouring headwinds of the right-wing media establishment. I mean, they are going to be doing the boogie on Fox News about that one. And you'll see all sorts of lies, as well as some very well-trafficked truths about how that would not work. Having one of the more moderate proposals, for example, expanding the Affordable Care Act and offering the option, as I think it was Amy Klobuchar has endorsed, of maybe people from 50 to 65 having a Medicare buy-in option would be something that might work. In other words, if you haven't got health insurance through your employer, that might be something to do. The point being, though, just having the Green New Deal, Chakrabarti, it's going to take me a while to get his name. I just became aware of him yesterday, so he hasn't sunk into the memory banks. The memory banks quite as thoroughly as he might have. I think of him as AOC Bose. That's what I think of him as. You know, I mean, what in the hell is this guy doing with a T-shirt with Subhas Chandra Bose? That would be like having a T-shirt of Reinhard Heydrich, you know, and say, yeah, I'm for Bernie Sanders. Yeah, oh, what's that T-shirt you got on? Oh, that's Reinhard Heydrich. Yeah, he was a really great German nationalist. You know, it doesn't compute. And this guy is obviously very smart. He may have just been playing an in-joke because he knows that Americans, you know, at this point, the average American couldn't tell a dirt road from a chicken with lips. And, you know, they're certainly not going to know who Subhas Chandra Bose is, but he may have been, you know, seeding the clouds of the right-wing media attack infrastructure, because it's already getting some circulation with the alt-right media people.
Gateway Pundit.
Pardon me?
Gateway Pundit has picked up this story of you know, of him wearing the shirt, which almost leads me to believe that it's, you know, is this almost by design? You know, I have such mixed feelings about Ocasio-Cortez. I mean, you know, part of me wonders, is this the kind of watered down, you know, kind of fake leftism that you need in order to eventually get something, you know, better on down the line? Is she that kind of that first step that you have to take? But then, you know, when she talks about, you know, Venezuela and other geopolitical things, and then when you've got her chief of staff wearing, you know, a T-shirt of a guy who was allied with Adolf Hitler and Imperial Japan, I mean, it does make you wonder: is this like almost, because I think, you know, what you were going to possibly allude to there, Dave, is the you know, the right wing, the alt-right, has already picked up on this oh, democratic socialism is national socialism. Look at this guy. And it's like tailor made for that kind of stuff. And, I think while that's incorrect, they're not incorrect in pointing this out. In saying, look at this. This is kind of an issue.
Well, it definitely is an issue. My take in the alt-right and the right wing, they see Hitler as a socialist, which he was not. In fact, the genesis of Nazi, which means National Socialist, Adolf Hitler was not a lone nut. At the end of World War One, the thing that actually brought about the conclusion of hostilities was a communist revolution in Germany, and this abortive Red Uprising in various cities, beginning, by the way, in the port of Kiel, the German port of Kiel, where the High Seas Fleet was moored, basically forced an end to hostilities. Adolf Hitler was a German army intelligence officer under the political department of General von Lossow. He infiltrated the communist revolutionaries in the Munich area, pretended to be one of them, and then after the Weimar army successfully put down, after the Reichswehr successfully put down the rebellion, he fingered all the leaders who were then taken out and shot. He then, on assignment from the political department of the Reichswehr, the German army, infiltrated a moribund political party called the German Socialist Workers' Party. He then changed it to the German National Socialist Workers' Party, and it became a front for, it represented itself as, quote, anti-capitalist, unquote, but identified capitalism as, quote, Jewish, unquote, and also aligned with communism. In the movie Cabaret, there is a wonderful scene near the end where a guy is reading the Völkische Beobachter, which was the official German Nazi Party paper. And his wife asks him, and he says, I don't understand. How can the Jews be both bankers and communists? Mm-hmm. And he says, simple. If they don't get us one way, they get us the other. And that really sort of, I think, epitomizes the attitude and elements of the right. They don't understand what Hitler was, most of them. The more intelligent ones not only understood it, but they loved it. The thing that I think is going to be the Bose T-shirt is going to be used is simply to discredit AOC and the forces around her, and justifiably so. And that on top of what she has already done. I think it would be a good thing to have young blood in the Democratic Party to not only provide a younger political base, but to give them some energy and to build affinity with other young people for the future. There is a reason, Pierce, that tribal societies have a council of elders. They look to the elders for advice. Young people have never been old, but now I speak as an old person. We were young once, and we remembered what it was. We remember what it was like, and how things appeared so simple at one time, when in fact they really aren't. And in politics, as Benjamin Disraeli said, again, politics is the art of the possible. You're not going to get all of what you want if you proceed with diligence and dedication and self-sacrifice. And if you work hard and for a long period of time, you may very well get a substantive amount of what you want. But you're never going to get all of what you want, and whatever you do get will not come easily or quickly, particularly in a country where political assassination and character assassination have become an established way of life. And also the creation of a controlled or phony opposition. And that's where I think, from the beginning, I looked at AOC and I said, man, she is straight from central casting. If I were part of the alt-right or the Trump people, she is a Latina, first of all, and the Trump people are openly, explicitly bigoted against Latinos and Latinas. She is incredibly young and naive. She may be feisty, but she's 29. Trust me, at the age of roughly 70, as far as I'm concerned, she still has breast milk on her breath. She is a kid. There's nothing wrong with being young, but when you are, you have to learn the ropes. And she thinks she has got it all covered. She has a background as a bartender. She acts like a bartender with, quick, snappy comebacks, breezy retorts without a lot of forethought going into them. And she has already been caught in some real serious lies or misinformation. She did not open her congressional office right away. She explained the delay on her contention that she wasn't being paid because of the government shutdown. Well, Congress people were being paid. Now, I don't know why she didn't open her office right away, but it wasn't because she wasn't getting paid. That simply was not true. And in relation to the Amazon imbroglio, she said, well, how come the $3 billion tax credit couldn't be used to, shore up our schools and the subways, etc.? Well, that isn't cash in hand, either for the city of New York and or Amazon. That is a tax credit which would have kicked in when the Amazon project got going. And this is not to say that the history of urban enterprises from Amazon, Google, and others do not produce some deleterious effects from gentrification. They do. They also do generate tax revenues. Jeff Bezos himself is an interesting fellow. His grandfather was at one point head of the Atomic Energy Commission and one of the founders of DARPA, by the way. His father was a Cuban emigre who was brought to the United States courtesy of a CIA program called Operation Peter Pan. Whether his father maintained any links with the CIA after that, I do not know. It certainly seems altogether possible. His father then went on to have a successful career with ExxonMobil, and the major petroleum companies have strong links to CIA, and his father bequeathed young Jeff $250,000, which Bezos then parlayed into his economic empire. So he has an interesting background himself, and I'm not someone that holds a brief for Amazon, but getting back to AOC, looking at her, she just looked, if I were Trump, or I were Steve Bannon, or I were Alt-Right, or David Duke, or any of these people, AOC is just what I would want. She calls herself a socialist. That's death in America politically. All these people, Bernie Sanders and AOC, we're democratic socialists. We're going to have socialism. Take this, young people, from an old person. Your chances of having socialism are the same as your chances of growing a beak and feathers. You aren't going to. If there is ever any reasonable possibility of your having socialism, you will be killed without hesitation or mercy. Now, the Republican right turns, and I love Paul Krugman had a quip in the column a couple of weeks ago. It's basically the Republican right terms brands as socialist anything to the left of eating poor people's babies. And that really is true. What AOC and their ilk really, and a lot of young people who, when polled, speak favorably of socialism, it is not really socialism, but what it is a broad, strong foundation of social democracy. They favor the systems embraced by countries that have strong, vigorous, effective, well-funded social safety nets, not socialist. But the Republicans turn that, that's socialism. Just like they can't tell you that they can't tell the difference between national socialism and real socialism. And if I were a member of the alt-right, AOC she is straight from the Sears mail order catalog, or maybe the Amazon mail order catalog. She is just what I would want. And I wondered almost from the beginning if that's what she was. Now, in her district, she is from Parkchester, and that used to be a working class and lower middle class Jewish neighborhood in the Bronx. It then, in recent years, has become primarily Latino and Indian. There's a very large Indian population in Parkchester, and by that, again, I don't mean Native American. I mean Indian from India. What I wondered about from the beginning, given the affinity between Trump and the RSS, and Bannon and the RSS, and Bannon's positive view of Modi and the BJP and Tulsi Gabbard, I wondered if right-wing RSS/BJP/Hindutva fascist money may have been channeled to AOC to boost her up, because she is perfect. She's like a piñata for the far right. I mean, she is full of herself. You know, she appears to be a very bright woman. She is certainly photogenic. She is articulate, but she is full of herself. She is very naive, and I think she is going to get burned. And I think the Democrats are idiots to have embraced her and her ilk so quickly. Certainly, you want to have, fresh blood in the Democratic Party. You want to have young people involved. That is the way you build the future. But to have someone like AOC, and she has a lot of company, coming in with basically their my way or the highway attitude, that won't work. The Green New Deal is an example. If we do not get a Green New Deal, we're all going to die. The human race is going to be all but extinct in 100, maybe 200 years, along with much of the rest of the planet. That is important, and it is too important, because it is necessary with a capital N, to throw in a whole bunch of stuff, as she did. You know, we're going to have free education and guaranteed employment and free medical care and all this other stuff. That is just what the far right wanted. And they're already saying, you see, you know, you let the Democrats in and you're going to have socialism, and it won't work. And, oh boy, this is going to be something else. And Bernie, again, he wants to get rid of private insurance. That will not work. One of the questions, Pierce, that people have not asked about Bernie Sanders, you know, this guy was not a member of the Democratic Party. Then he joined so he could become president. Then he quit the Democratic Party about 2 days after the Democratic Convention of 2016. Now he wants to be the Democratic nominee for president. People aren't stopping to ask a very basic question. That is so cynical. Suppose, it's difficult to think of a proper, simile, but suppose, I were in a town and I wanted to lead an organization, so I joined the organization, but I didn't get elected to lead it, so I quit 2 days later. Then a few years later, I rejoined the party so I can become leader again. Mm. The consummate, self-serving cynicism of something like that is maybe the largest question. People aren't asking that about Bernie Sanders. Karl Rove was helping to bankroll Bernie Sanders' 2016 campaign. One of his top economic advisors, probably his top economic advisor, although former Labor Secretary Robert Reich, Labor Secretary under Clinton, is arguably the best known of Sanders' economic advisors. His top economic advisor is a guy named Jeffrey Sachs, S-A-C-H-S, who was one of the Harvard boys who was sent to the former Soviet Union to deconstruct Soviet socialism, and did so in such a precipitous, ungraduated fashion that it manifested an absolute economic and social disaster, not only in Russia, but in the other former Soviet republics. The oligarchs, whom we hear so much about, were the direct and most immediate outgrowth of Jeffrey Sachs' policies. what happened with Sachs was he took a real socialist system. It was a Marxist, really, Marxist-Leninist socialist system, I should say, and completely privatized it willy-nilly. And former apparatchiks, former Communist Party officials who were in charge of the state natural gas industry or the copper smelting industry or the electrical industry, they overnight became these fabulously wealthy, powerful captains of industry and or finance, whereas they were party bureaucrats and hacks going into that. And so, surprise, surprise, many of them, not all of them, but many of them became incredibly corrupt. Jeffrey Sachs was the primary author, there was a group of them called the Harvard Boys, of that plan. The Russians said of Jeffrey Sachs, he was sent either by Satan or the CIA. Well, I don't believe in the existence of Satan. I have never seen anything concrete that he is CIA. I think we can say confidently that it is an area where the CIA would very much like to have had someone, and the CIA excels at nothing so much as getting what they want and getting the people they want where they want them, when they want them to be there. And all of a sudden, the guy who is maybe the single most cavalier destructor of Soviet socialism suddenly allies himself with Bernie Sanders, the great socialist hope. And now he is allied with AOC. He's blowing in her ear as well. I wonder how much this Green New Deal on free education, free jobs, free medical care, everything for free, whoopee. I wonder how much of that comes from Jeffrey Sachs. Again, there is a discontinuity here that people are not looking at. Why is a guy who is arguably the single most effectively destructive deconstructor of Soviet Marxist-Leninist socialism suddenly aligning himself with the democratic socialists in the U.S.? That doesn't make sense on its surface. It does make sense if one sees Jeffrey Sachs as kind of an ideological and advisorial Trojan horse, which I believe he is. And it's just, it is amazing to me to watch. The Democrats are being driven willy-nilly by the Sanders and the AOCs and adopting all of their policies, and I think it is going to be a disaster. One of the things about Bernie, one of the reasons why tribal people have a council of elders, again, they've seen more of life and they've learned some things. One of the things that looms very large in matters political to me is the old story of the emperor's new clothes, If everyone has been told that the emperor is wearing a marvelous, expensive new ermine cape as he parades in front of his subjects, the emperor can be walking down Main Street buck naked, and people will not admit what is really going on. And people in the audience will say, "Oh my, isn't that a wonderful ermine cape that the emperor has?" And the cognoscenti, the dissenting intellectual will take a look and say, "Well, actually, I don't see any ermine cape. Well, I think he's absolutely naked." But his associates will say, "Oh, what do you mean naked? No, he's wearing a beautiful ermine cape. Can't you see it?" I don't see any ermine cape. If that's an ermine cape, what's that hanging down there? Oh, that's an ermine tail. Bernie Sanders is a naked emperor. The man is an idiot. He is so stupid, and people will not recognize this. If you look at the file photographs, go up on Google and look at pictures, you can see there are a lot of pictures where you can see how incredibly stupid he is. A lot of times he looks like someone just hit him over the head with a giant mallet. You know, you almost hear his eyeballs rattling around. He is an idiot. Back in the 2016 campaign, now, again, I agree with many of the ideal policy stances of Bernie Sanders, as I agree with many of the ideal, and note the use of the term ideal, policy stances of AOC, but the difference is that I'm an adult. AOC is still a kid, and Bernie Sanders is a kid too, and he's 77 goddamn years old. And I can't tell with Bernie whether he is so stupid because he's so immature, or because he's so immature because he is so stupid. But he is an idiot. He couldn't tell a dirt road from a chicken with lips. He's a moron, and that shows in a lot of the things he does. He's a rube. In 2016, there was a day when they had a number of primaries, Democratic primaries, in the Deep South. Hillary Clinton swept it. And she swept it because the African-American vote in those states went overwhelmingly to Hillary Clinton, who didn't want a Republican because they knew what that meant. When Bernie Sanders was queried by reporters and asked for his response, he gave that dumb, just got hit over the head with a big mallet smile of his. So those are pretty conservative states, aren't they? What an idiotic response. If he had watched 2 minutes of television news, he would have known more about that than he did. You know, he obviously had no understanding whatsoever of the phenomenon in which he was involved. The guy is running for president, okay? Something like this, off the top of my head, you know. Well, first of all, I want to congratulate Mrs. Clinton on her victory, blah, 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 blah. Exit polls show that the turnout for Hillary Clinton came largely from African-American voters. The Democratic Party has traditionally been a place of refuge for oppressed minorities, you know, blah, 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 blah. Going forward, I want to encourage not only African-Americans, but all Americans to look at my program carefully, and I think you'll find it is superior to that of Hillary Clinton, blah, 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 blah. Not, well, gee, those are pretty conservative states, aren't they? What a dumb response. He isn't qualified to be dog catcher, let alone president of the United States. Plus, he is a, quote, democratic socialist. In 1980, at the age of 37, he was a presidential elector for the Socialist Workers' Party. That is a Trotskyist communist party. And man, if he ever gets the Democratic nomination, the right-wing media establishment is going to do the boogie. You'll see Fox News. They'll take the hippiest, gooeyest picture of a young Bernie Sanders, and they'll have it up there with a big red hammer and sickle and a big red question mark, and they will do the boogie on his head. They will destroy him. Sanders is a moron. He was, after the death of George H.W. Bush, Sanders was asked for his response. And he said, well, of course, he was a Republican, so there are many differences in what he believed in, what I believed in, but he wasn't racist or divisive. Are you kidding me? In 1988, George H.W. Bush won the presidency with the Willie Horton gambit. Michael Dukakis, the former governor of Massachusetts, was his opponent, and he had paroled a black convict named Willie Horton, who I believe then raped and murdered someone. But this became George Bush's election campaign, basically, the Willie Horton gambit crafted by Lee Atwater. The point being that George Bush became president precisely because he was so divisively racist, indicating yet again that Bernie Sanders had absolutely no idea what he was talking about, and that the guy is a really bad actor. You know, it is something. I mean, Vermont is a beautiful place. It's a tiny, lovely, vibrant New England state with wonderful environmental policies, very, very progressive, wonderful consumer policies, and generally a pretty nice place to live. It also has a tiny population, maybe 2/3 to 3/4 of the city of San Jose, California, and there are no people of color in Vermont to speak of. It is basically a Swiss cheese sandwich with mayonnaise on white bread. There ain't no colored folks in Vermont, and Bernie Sanders is a really sorry act, aside from the fact that Karl Rove was helping to bankroll his campaign. He has a left-covered Hindutva fascist, Tulsi Gabbard, putting his name into nomination and then becoming his prospective vice presidential candidate. She may have leaked the DNC emails through Roger Stone to WikiLeaks, or perhaps through Craig Murray to WikiLeaks. He's got Jeffrey Sachs, whom, again, the Russians say he was sent either by Satan or the CIA. I don't believe in Satan. Whoever sent him, he was the primary architect for the disastrous deconstruction of the Marxist-Leninist Soviet socialist state, and suddenly he is the go-to guy for the new democratic socialists, Bernie Sanders or AOC. You know, it's like those old puzzles. What's wrong with this picture? You know?
Yeah.
And there is a lot wrong with that picture. In fact, damn near everything is wrong with that picture.
No, just as you were talking there, Dave. I mean, I think that's kind of the my biggest issue. I think you just sort of spelled it all out there with Sanders in particular. Is that like you say, I just don't think he's all that intelligent. I don't really think he's a savvy politician. I think he's a savvy politician in, you know, the way that a guy of his particular demeanor is able to win over and over again in Vermont. You know what I mean? Like he can run as a politician in Vermont. I won't take that away from him. But yeah, like you said, I don't think he really is all that smart. I think he has this sense of, like, you know, that he kind of wants to be like, I'm running everything. Which is not really how a successful politician should operate. And as you can see, in that attempt, he has surrounded himself with some very unsavory characters. I mean, Jeffrey Sachs being a big one. And I think this is very indicative of the larger issue with this new crop of so-called democratic socialists or progressive Democrats, left-wing, you know, whatever, all of these monikers that keep getting tossed around. You know, number one, many of them seem to be of not much substance when you really break it down. And so many of them are compromised by a variety of different political forces, you know, issues in their past and whatnot, which in so many ways seems so kind of tailor-made to ensure that the right wing continues to win electorally.
Yep, you just hit the nail on the head, Pierce, with that last statement. I think that's what they are. And Bernie Sanders, by the way, he wanted to make all of the primaries open primaries so that Republicans could vote in the Democratic primary. And no doubt that was just Karl Rove, that set Karl Rove to doing the varsity rag, you know? I mean, it's just, and most of Sanders' victories were in states that have open primaries or caucuses, which are tremendously undemocratic. You know, he has a background with a Trotskyite communist party, the Socialist Workers' Party. If he ever, he identifies himself as a socialist. If he ever got elected, and I don't think he will, I hope he doesn't get the nomination because he'll put the Republicans back in. But if he ever did get elected president, he will set a new world's indoor record for death. They will kill him so quickly. You know? And they won't have to arrange a motorcade through Dealey Plaza. You know, they just say, oh, he had a heart attack, you know.
He
had a
man.
stroke. Okay, he's an old man, you know, isn't it a shame? Rest in peace, Bernie Sanders, you know. But, you know, and something I wonder about. I've spoken many times over the years at great length, over the decades, really, about not only the profound backing of our most prominent industrialists and financiers for fascism, but the incorporation of the entire Third Reich national security establishment, their intelligence service under Reinhard Gehlen, their top military scientists, many of them SS war criminals, under Project Paperclip, the fusing of corporate America with the underground corporate apparatus headed up by Nazi Party leader Martin Bormann, who absolutely survived the war and continued to lead the party underground. There was a military intelligence officer in 1957 called Pinchback at Fort Sill in Oklahoma, and he had the job of examining the mail of some of the soldiers at Fort Sill. And there was a guy named Barahona, who was an American Nazi, and who was networking with David Ferry, New Orleans DA Jim Garrison's first target in his investigation of the JFK assassination. And what Pinchback had come across in screening the mail, he said there is a neo-Nazi, this is 1957, a neo-Nazi plot, gargantuan in scope, to enslave America using anti-communism, or perhaps to use anti-communism to enslave America. Well, the Gehlen organization dramatically exaggerated everything that the Soviet Union not only intended to do, but was capable of doing for that reason, to generate militant anti-communism. If, for the sake of argument, one wants to enslave America using anti-communism, you can't do that without communists. My greatest fear with Bernie Sanders and with Jeffrey Sachs looming like the economic philosophical Count Dracula behind his shoulder is that if Bernie Sanders did get into place and did get a chance to implement what he wants, we're going to eliminate all of the private health insurance, and Jeffrey Sachs will get in there and say, well, let's do this, and, appoints AOC to be God knows what, Secretary of the Interior, and it will precipitate a complete economic collapse of the U.S., and that in turn will collapse the global economy. I think that's going to happen. Anyway, it happened in 2008, and they'll just say, well, gee whiz, we've got to bail these companies out because of these banks out, they're too big to fail. But that would be a great way of seeing to it that you could have an overt Sam Brown and brown shirt and jackboot wearing street-level fascist movement take this country over. Because after the, quote, democratic socialists, unquote, like Bernie Sanders or AOC, with, again, the economic philosopher Count Dracula, Jeffrey Sachs, looming over their shoulders, saying, well, why don't you do this? Why don't you do this? And there's an absolute disaster results. And the U.S. and the rest of the industrialized world are in a state of aggravated chaos, and there is widespread, unspeakable suffering. Then people say, the Browns just go out and kill everybody they want to, and we'll have an overt, Sieg Heil type of government instead of a more clandestine Sieg Heil type of government. That is just a thought. I think, though, the more likely scenario is just to have Bernie be Bernie, and we're gonna have this, and Jeffrey Sachs will say, why don't we do this? And he'll say that to AOC. He revealed in an article in the Nation magazine last fall that he was backing Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I wonder if he is blowing in her ear, again, like an economic philosophical Count Dracula. Come to me, AOC. I have this idea. We are going to have a Green New Deal with free public education and free medical care and a guaranteed job for all. Look into my eyes, Alexandria. This is the Green New Deal. And I just... Oh boy!
Dave, I think this is a good place to end this particular conversation. But I would love to have you back on to kind of explore these topics some more. I mean, we've been talking for over 2 hours. I mean, I've got about a 1,000 more questions I'd like to ask you. But like I said, you're more than welcome to come back on. I'd love to kind of explore this, maybe even too as we get a little bit closer. In the real run up to the 2020, and certainly during the 2020 election, to have you back on the show to discuss that more. And I would also, I'd love to touch on, JFK and 9/11, and of course, you were one of the first people that really got me into the O.J. Simpson trial, which I've done quite a bit on. But
oh man,
yes, good friend Steven Singular has been on the show many, many times, and it was your old interviews with him and Donald Fried that really kind of got me into exploring O.J. Simpson and Mark Furman and the Nazi connections with all of that. But I think we'll leave it here for this particular episode. Very quickly, I wanted to thank our mutual friend Hal, who actually set this all up. So thank you, Hal, for putting Dave and I in contact. And I hope to have you back on the show again, Dave. But also, please tell the listeners where they can go to find all of your work.
All of my life work plus a mini library of old anti-fascist books, most of them from before, during, or immediately after World War II. Go to www.spitfirelist.com. That's Spitfire, like the World War II British fighter plane list, one word, SPITFIRELIST.com. All that has my entire life's work there. Plus, again, that library of old anti-fascist books available for download for free. And it is all for free. There is no money charged for any of it. If people would like to send a contribution, it will be most welcome.
Yeah, and there is a link on Spitfire List to, if you want to send money or donate, and we'll link up to that in the show notes for this episode. Once again, Dave Emory, thank you so much for joining us this week, and I'd love to have you back on again soon.
A pleasure, and yes, absolutely. As many times as you would like to do that, and as many times as I have time to do it. Sure, absolutely. I've enjoyed it here.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for listening, and I'll be talking to you very soon.